Hello people, part 2 of our look at Tony Blair's deconstruction of the House of Lords, or the House of Peers, whichever way you would like to refer to it as. Thankfully, I did a bit more looking around and I managed to find a table that I couldn't find in episode 1, or part 1. So here we are, let's go straight into this. So this is a comprehensive table of the titles. These are referred to as precedents, or precedenze, because obviously we're speaking Latin now. So take this all with a pinch of salt. This is all very old and out of date, but you know, these titles have been around since a long time. So it gives you a general idea of where you might fit in. So you got the king, you got the children, you got the military people here, the Lord Marshals, Lord Admiral, dukes, marquis. So these are the nobles that you see in the House of Lords, dukes, marquesses, earls, viscounts, and then eventually you'll see barons down here somewhere. The riffraff, as our good friend referred to them as, the riffraff. So, and then it goes down a bit more. So you know, enjoy, watch, pause, read. Goes all the way down. So down here is the sergeants in law, which is servants at law. So these are the people who used to have rights of audience to speak on people's behalf in courts, and this eventually turned into the role of barristers. So they are two separate things, but essentially the sergeants of law, barristers became of equal standing with the sergeants at law. So these phased out, and barristers just became the norm, so to speak. Doctors. Now this is where I wanted to prove that doctors, to whom it is said the rank of barrister at law, as to those precedents among each other. So this is where the doctorates perhaps come from. And then we go up to squires, shield bearers, gentlemen, people of not noble birth but otherwise good character, yeomen, tradesmen, which would be like your, Joe Bloggs, and the craftsmen. And that's it really. So this is where you fit in down here. So from king to the real riffraff, so to speak, and there's quite a few titles and people with all kinds of privileges and immunities and God knows what else all the way up. So there we are. I just wanted to give you the official table. Now the one thing I kind of overlooked but I want to go straight into is, as we're talking about Tony Blair and his election manifesto of '97, I managed to find a reasonably good preserved copy of it. I think this is just transposed onto the internet. But here is where, let me compare this to something like For Britons. Is Britain like that? Manifesto. I didn't get this up because, it pains me sometimes to do this. Oh, hello. Oh, she's rejigged the website. Oh. Policy? So it's gone to policy now, is it? Oh, here we are. The manifesto's still here, thankfully. So this is like how you and I would write a manifesto, yeah? Kind of like sit down, whack out some ideas, and, it'll be done within, I don't know, 20 pages, maybe 19, possibly less with the content. So let's say about 18 pages of gumph, which is like your inner thinkings, which I've been through this in my For Britain video about how weak this is in terms of the language use. Now I think what's her name? Anne Marie has mentioned that she was a law student. So you read this. It's For Britain Manifesto. Just read the style of it, okay, and then you go to something that has been done in what I would call terms of art. So this is very much like the layman language, pumping out some ideas, crossing over into Latin, into legalese, into all kinds of different languages, mostly English, obviously, as you'd like to think of it. But when you go to something like the Labour '97 manifesto, I mean, holy crap! This thing is what's sometimes called terms of art, or it's almost like a work of art. The detail, the language used is all very much done by a legal lawyer. Someone who's properly knows why there's not a capital N there and there is a capital L there, and because has a little b and a Britain has a big B, deserves better. Britain, blah blah blah. So anyway, let me get back to where I was if I can find it. It's things like we will save the NHS. This is such a comprehensive manifesto in terms of what they are, which is supposed to be a public declaration, but as I've covered many times, manifesto comes from Latin root manifestare, which is to betray, because if you don't do these things, you essentially are publicising something that potentially you're going to betray the people on. So there's two elements of like public declaration of what you plan to do, but in the same time it's also an element of if you don't do it, you betray. So it's kind of like, hey, this is our betray pledge or our declaration of what we pledge to do. But in either way, it's not really worth the paper it's written on. And people go on about manifestos like they're some sort of like binding contract or promise or whatever. It's nothing. It's a piece of paper with a load of ideas on it. So don't get carried away with it. Now we will clean up politics. This is Tony Blair's manifesto. So clean up politics. Clean up. It's a dirty game, politics, and we're coming in to clean it up. Tony Blair's legacy. Would anyone really say that he did that? End the hereditary principle in the House of Lords. Reform the party fundraising to end sleaze. So he's calling out very specific terms here. Devolving power to Scotland and Wales, and look where that's got us, with Scotland on the brink of a referendum every other year to try and break away from the United Kingdom, and something similar no doubt will eventually happen with Wales when they get delusions of grandeur. Electing mayors of London and other cities, so he wants more mayors, more independent but accountable local government. So he wants to decentralise to make local government, which has kind of happened. We've got this kind of city-state nonsense going on at the moment. Whereas I thought I lived in England and I can't take my rubbish now to my local skip because the council there says, oh, if you're not in our council, you're not getting in. It's like, hang on a minute, I'm a people of the country. I go where I please, where I wish. And they say, oh, if you're not part of our council, mate, you ain't coming in. So there's benefits to localising your government, but there's also nonsenses that crop up like that. So it's like, am I living in England or am I living in a town, a city-state? It's crazy. So now he makes a statement, right? Because he's not naming an individual, and he's also defining it with capital letters. So the Conservatives seem opposed to the very idea of democracy, which is fantastic. I mean, I don't trust Tories, I don't trust Labour, I don't trust any of them. But this is a Labour government attacking the Conservatives. They say that they're undemocratic. They support hereditary peers, unaccountable quangos and selective governments. They have debased democracy through their MPs who have taken cash for asking questions of the House of Commons. So if you wish to ask a question in the House of Commons, they've been taking bungs or whatever it is, payoffs to do it. That's one hell of an accusation to make in a manifesto, but of course they've not accused anyone of doing it. They just accused something called MPs, whatever that is. They are opposed to the development of decentralised government. The party which once opposed universal suffrage and votes for women now says our constitution is so perfect it cannot be improved. So they're kind of bringing in like the women card, yeah. Hey girls, we're on your side, and these guys are not on your side. Our system of government is centralised, inefficient, and bureaucratic. Oh, well, it didn't get any better under it got more bureaucratic under the Labour government. Our citizens, again, the citizens, not people. Our citizens cannot assert their basic rights in our own courts. That, if anything, has got worse. I'm hoping it's going to get better soon, especially since people like Carl Lentz and others have come forth and tried to get people at least thinking about asserting their own rights in courts of law, which judiciary is independent of all this government nonsense. The Conservatives are affected by sleaze and prosper from secret funds from foreign supporters. There is unquestionably a national crisis of confidence in our political system, to which the Labour will respond with a measured and sensible way. A modern House of Lords, by all means read that. This is what we're concentrating on. So this is his plans, essentially, about replacing the House of Lords. And I love in this section here, we have no plans to replace the monarchy. Because if you did, it would be sedition. So let's confirm to the masses that we are not being seditious. We are entirely supporting the monarchy, but we're getting rid of those other nobles that get their titles from the monarchy. An effective House of Lords, open government, devolution to strengthen the union. I mean, isn't that not a contradiction of terms? Let's break glass up to strengthen the glass. But anyway, so have a little read of this. I found this on www.politicsresources.net. So by all means, if you love, you got a bit of time and you love to read a 1997 manifesto, please do so. But this is where he's pointed out in his manifesto what he wishes to do with the Lords and stuff. And now we're going to look at some. If you remember, we were talking about, was it Hang on, I've got it on here. Lord Cranborn in the previous video. Now, in the previous video, Lord Cranborn was off making backroom deals with Tony Blair's government to basically kind of see where he. So it's all self-preservation at the end of the day. So in that video, which was done by the BBC and that female reporter, there's two other documentaries that are made, and this one is very much concentrated. This is the Blair's 1,000 Days, the lady and the Lords. This very much concentrates on those backroom dealings that this Lord Cranborne was doing, and it's quite interesting. I'm just going to highlight two elements of this, just so you can get an idea. I had a suspicion about this Lord Cranborne, and when you actually hear the facts about it, you always go with your gut feelings. They tend to be right. So this is just a meeting that Cranborne was having with this guy, who's a representative of the Labour government, who's basically the guy who's talking to Tony Blair about getting Lords out. So you've got a Lord talking to this guy who's now talking to Tony Blair and trying to break a deal. And let's have a little look at the kind of the tone of the conversation.
I must say, in all my dealings with Derry, he's been completely straight. He has kept his word, kept quiet about what he said he kept quiet about, and I've never had any problem with him at all.
One of the most amazing parts of this story, Michael, and it must cause great frustration to the media, is that radio silence was maintained. It must have been the best kept secret for a very long time in British politics.
Before Tony Blair made him Lord Chancellor, Derry Ervin was a commercial lawyer, well used to cutting a deal. He decided to make Cranborne an offer. A few hereditary peers could be reprieved in exchange for Tory cooperation over the abolition bill.
So they're looking for cross-party cooperation to get rid of these hereditary lords. So this is how we get to that number of, was it 94 or 90? Was it 92, 94? 92. So this is how we got to the figure of 92 lords. So it's very interesting because it wasn't 92 at the beginning, and all these negotiations tell you how they got to that figure of 92.
Sure as eggs, Derry gets in touch and says, all right, what about 15 self-elected hereditaries in the transitional house? So I said, don't be so ridiculous. I'm not in the business of bargaining. Derry said, I'm not in the business of bargaining either. So I said, well, I'll tell you what I want is 100. It's the minimum I think I can get away with. And he laughed and he said, don't be so silly. So I said, well, fine. Battle of the Somme and Passchendaele will ruin your legislative programme next year, and the whole thing will be deeply embarrassing and ghastly.
He was describing the uncontrollable conduct of the hosts of backbench Tory hereditaries on his benches. He wasn't issuing a formal threat. He was just describing what he no doubt genuinely believed would have occurred, and my recollection is that he used the expression Somme and Passchendaele.
Yeah, exactly. Good recollection, confirmed by both parties. So, there we go. Now we're going to go on to 2002, and this is where, so they've been in cahoots negotiating this let's say, independent lord who's linked to the Conservative, or if you're American, a Republican Party. And so he's made these backroom deals, but he's not actually being straight with his fellow members of fellow party members about it. So we're going to leap forward to that element and see exactly what happens and see the beatdown that leads to.
Both men had weapons of last resort they preferred not to use. Cranborne didn't want to draw further fire on the Tory peers by defying a popular Labour government. And Ervin knew that the government could bulldoze its legislation through, but it would cause chaos. So they both had an interest in reaching agreement.
Anyway, he rang me up and he said, what about 50? This was some days later. So I said, well, I'm on the business of bargaining. And I reported this to Hague, who was amused. He was the only one who knew about this at this stage. And by July, we'd got as far as 75. There was a certain rationale. It was 1 in 10, roughly, of the hereditary peers.
1 in 10 would mean 75. It was a formula. 1 in 10 didn't seem to be so unacceptable.
So that's where they got the number. They just keep haggling, basically. It's a haggle, haggle, haggle. So I went a little bit too... I didn't go in the right place. This is where...
His own side.
Yeah.
But Cranborne now ran into trouble with his own side when the Tory shadow cabinet vetoed the deal. But he wasn't to be put off. He was later to be called the Oscar Schindler of the hereditary peers.
I don't know who Oscar Schindler is, but Schindler's List, maybe? Something like that? Some sort of Nazi reference?
For without telling his own leader, William Hague, he smuggled himself into number 10 to discuss the deal directly with Tony Blair.
So he's been vetoed by his own party, and he's still pursuing it, and he's gone and had a secret meeting with the Prime Minister of the opposition.
Blair is a little late. He was very agreeable, offered me whiskey. We sat down in one of the sitting rooms upstairs. He suggested that it would be sensible to let this out sooner rather than later. At least one would have some sort of control over it, and I saw the force of that. We talked about the details of how that might be done. And he said, well, that all sounds perfectly possible. But I better ask Alistair to see whether he thinks it's all right. And so I said, well, I'd be perfectly happy to talk to Campbell.
Cranborne met Blair's press secretary Alistair Campbell to work out how best to make the deal public. He was still keeping William Hague in the dark.
I do think at that time Lord Cranborne had an awareness that he was skating on very, very thin ice. I think that it must be the case that he saw a real risk that he would be dismissed, because he did say that from one point of view, perhaps what he was doing was committing high treason.
Cranborne at last told Hague what he'd agreed with Tony Blair.
So this is the opposition leader. So, you've got Trump on one side. I don't know who's the leader of the Democrats at the moment. I don't know who the leader of the Democrats is in America, but let's say it was Trump and Hillary lost the election, but she would still remain the leader of the Democrat Party. But I don't know who the leader of the Democrat is. So this is just the opposition who argues as a shadow government to the opposition government to just counter-argue a lot of the proposals made by government. So he's in a position where he has to face the leader of the country, the Prime Minister, and he's now being told before Prime Minister's question times by Cranborne on the right about this deal that he's had, and it looks like we can get 100 people or 92 people, hereditary peers, kept in the House in order to let this thing go away. So you can see William Hague's a little bit pissed off. So thankfully they got a picture of this at the time. I mean, I'm a genius.
He was extremely upset. And I said, well, please don't raise it at Prime Minister's question time, which was his initial reaction.
Please don't raise it at Prime Minister's question time. And William Hague is, I'm going to raise it at Prime Minister's question time. And he's like, no, please don't. Because obviously William Hague's just been made aware of this deal, where it's been going on behind his back for a hell of a long time.
Just raise it. Because it'll make you look an awful fool. And Blair will make mincemeat of you. Anyway, he said, no, I must.
No good honourable members opposite shaking their heads. What they don't know is the Prime Minister does propose to keep hereditary peers.
So this is William Hague. So he's gone into the House of Commons to kind of, throw a hand grenade at Tony Blair and his government, because they wanted to abolish all the hereditary lords, and he thinks he's throwing in a hand grenade to say, Tony Blair is keeping hereditary peers because he's been doing backroom deals.
In a stage 1 reform of the House of Lords, where does that leave his principles now?
Mr. Speaker, I take it from that.
So Tony Blair has just had that bombshell given to him in Parliament, and now he has to stand up and think on his feet and react to it, and this is really clever.
That he opposes the deal that has been agreed by the leader of the Conservative Party in the House of Lords.
So he's now saying, so you're not happy to go ahead with the leader of the Conservative Party in the other chamber, in the Senate or the House of Lords. So you're not obviously, he agrees for it, but you don't. That's interesting.
Now, Madam Speaker, as a result of this, we will indeed remove hereditary peers.
Hague tried another line of attack.
No deal has been made with the Conservative Party. What we know, Madam Speaker, is that the Prime Minister intends to turn the House of Lords into a house of cronies.
Madam Speaker, look, I can't prevent the Right Honourable Gentleman engaging in what is a kamikaze mission on his side. All I can say to him is that even his cronies in the House of Lords agree with me that it's better to try and get...
Such a good rebuttal, man. That was a work of art. Talk about putting a sock in your mouth, William Hague. He got absolutely beat down then. Because he knows that he's been having meetings with this guy's his own team, and that some of his team has agreed to deal with him, and yet their leader doesn't know. So he's just showing how split their party is, all because of Cranborne making a mess of everything. Well, he's trying to do it, but he's doing it from self-preservation point of view. A bit of excitement, a bit of diplomacy, negotiations, all that kind of stuff. But he's not in the business of bargaining. Have to look up bargain and why it's such a slurred word. Right. Well, anyway, that's good. So we got an idea of what Cranborne was up to, and the kind of mentality of the people working in the Houses of Commons. We're going to move a little bit forward to our Australian clips. Oh, this guy's really good. I'll go back to him in a minute. But this is going on about... we'll do a little bit of this guy. He's good.
They're not interested in what I've got to say.
So this is a lord who sits in the House, like a lifetime senator or a hereditary senator forever and ever. So he sits in and he's just said, they're not interested in what I have to say.
People say, they're not interested in what I've got to say, but they like to have my vote.
They, again, he's talking about the they.
They've always had it.
So they've always had it. They've always had my vote as long as I've been in there.
Would you describe yourself as lobby fodder?
Yes, that's right.
Lobby fodder. So basically, we need some votes to make this bill go through, or we need some votes to block this bill. Make sure you vote in a certain way so that we can get our result that we wish to get. So whoever the they is, when he gets instruction, he follows it. And then we've got the flip side of all of this nonsense is someone like this, who's a military man, who's some baron of something or other. And this is an alternative view on the hereditary peers and what some of them have in terms of history with the nation at large and supporting the nation in its days of empire and probably post-glorious revolution expansionism.
Proud of its long tradition of service.
And here is a perfect example. My great-grandfather, who was Jackie Fisher, 1st Sea Lord, First World War, and you probably have heard the great cry about the dreadnought battleships. Well, the Fisher's motto is fear God and dreadnought, and hence, of course, the name of the battleship.
Which I thought was quite cute. So we all know where the word or the term dreadnought comes from. Fear God and dreadnought.
Now, the uniform room which we've just entered holds all of the tunics worn by ancestors of mine.
As fighting men, the Cliffords were always willing to lend a hand.
We go past the uniform of the 9th Lord Clifford, and he was a man who, when he went out with a friend of his to shoot elk, and deer and the likes, buffalo, in the United States of America and Canada, bumped into a man called General Custer and took part in the Battle of Yellowstone River. That is Henry Hugh Clifford, who fought in the Crimean War, quite apart from the Zulu War, China.
And what thanks does the family get for centuries of sacrifice? In 6 months, Lord Clifford could be saying farewell to the House of Lords for good. Mind you, the Clifford's fighting pedigree doesn't allow surrender as an option.
So you're disappointed that your son is not going to get to sit in the House of Lords as an hereditary peer?
No, I'm disappointed at you, Chris, in fact, for saying that he's not going to.
You don't think you've lost?
I think it's a question of trying to present a very balanced argument.
But what exactly is the argument for retaining hereditary peers in a modern democracy?
Remember, we are not elected. Not elected. Therefore, we are not biased. We're not looking over our shoulders at the electorate to see if we're doing the right thing, saying the right thing.
That kind of contradicts, just to stop it there, that kind of contradicts what that other old guy was saying, wasn't he? That Earl, who was saying, he's lobby fodder, and he's saying we're not elected, we're not biased. So there's a contradiction here.
We are examining our conscience and thinking whether or not the legislation put forward by the other place is correctly drafted, fairly drafted, is practical, and is policeable.
Policeable. Yeah, practical, policeable legislation from the other place, as they demean it to be. So, there we go. One last little clip, and then I'll go into part 3. 1455. Here we go. Back to this guy.
And they've headed out to sea.
So remember what I was saying about the Iraq? I made an Iraq War reference with the House of Lords. This is just him putting his own spin on that. 1455.
Mixture of appointed and elected peers. The Cliffords will fight to the last man, of course.
They've jumped into a motorboat, the government. They've started the engine and they've headed out to sea. And they don't know how much fuel they've got and what they're going to do, of course, when they run out of fuel. And it's a very shark-infested sea.
Others take a more...
There we go, and it moves on to Lord Bath. Good old Bath. Always good for the tourists. Yeah, so there we go. That's basically what we're looking at here. In part 3, I'll go over this, because this is the main video I want to cover, because this is really from the Lord's point of view. And there are some fantastic Lords who go into some points of law, points of legislature, just moral points, and just like a great overview. I mean, these guys, yes, they're stuffy and they're toffee and they're posh as hell, but at the end of the day, they weren't as... There is an element of them not being bound to a particular party, like in America they have our Democrats own the Senate, or the Republicans have control of the Senate, so therefore the Democrats will never... there's none of that nonsense going on. These people have... A lot of them are crossbenchers, they call them, like independent. They don't really care if you're Conservative or Labour. They basically are there as the House of Lords. They used to be the highest law court of the legislature. So these people were like almost to the standard of judges. So you'd have literally a house full of judges. I mean, they weren't obviously all like that, but that's essentially what they should be attaining to, those kind of levels of interpretation of the law in the legislature. So they could see like nonsense coming through from a mile away. So if Tony Blair decides to say, right, we're gonna nationalise everything all over again, they might say, well, that's a good idea, but maybe not a good idea. And they'll just say, well, who cares about Labour or Conservative? Let's just look at the nationalisation without someone on your back, like a whip, or they call them whips, like party appeasers, that make sure that everyone's not singing from the same hymn book and we're all going in the right direction, kumbaya, as a party, so that we can get our legislation through in an effective way. So I'll leave it here for part 2, and in part 3 we'll soldier on. I've covered the Australian one, and I've covered this. I found this yesterday as well. This Blair's 1,000 Days, which is it's an hour video, but it's an interesting insight into what was actually going on with this Lord Cranborn. Yeah, his name will go down in history one way or the other. Yeah, so there we are. I'll leave it there. I'll see you in part 3. Tatty bye.